Hi, happy Father's Day, everyone. I want to give you just a little video to commemorate my father, who I loved very much. This is a picture from the early 80s when people were visiting us here in Roanoke, Virginia. My sister on the right, my husband, and my father and my mother retired here. My father was born to a 100% Irish mother, Mary Murphy, and her and his father, Pete Gedettis, who was half Irish and half German, and they were all 100% Catholic. So of course, my father and his big brother grew up as altar boys. These two children were clearly adored by Peter and Mary because there are countless photographs of them at every possible age. And I really treasure the candidates that I have here and many more. They grew up, their family grew up kind of on the Jersey Shore. Peter and Mary settled in, started in Jersey City, where their families both emigrated to when they came from Europe. And they lived on very close to the Jersey Shore, just a couple of blocks in my memory when we would go visit them. This is a lot of the extended family. That's my dad. That's my granddad. This is my grandfather's sister. And I think my grandmother is hidden. She's the hidden person in the center. And then I believe this is her mother, or maybe it's Pete's mother. I'm not really sure. So this was a blue collar family. My granddad worked in the shipyards, and my grandmother may have had some businesses from things that my family told me, but I think her main accomplishment in life was that she was such an extraordinarily dedicated woman in her parish and her church. And when she died, hundreds and hundreds of people came to her funeral mass. So many that when my parents walked out of the church, they were crowding the streets because they didn't fit in the church. So once Dad got to high school, he was a pretty interesting guy, actually. My mother always told me that he had worked his way in college by being like an Arthur Murray dance teacher. I'm not sure exactly what. And I had no evidence of that until I went doing my genealogy searching, and I found his high school yearbook online. And here he is right there as a member of the dancing instructors club in his high school. He also was in the play production there, which apparently was done by the senior class generally to fund their senior trip. And then just briefly, that's his high school graduation. Just briefly, I'll stop sharing so I can show you these two rings that I'm wearing. These are the rings of high school rings for both my father. This is my father's, and from 1941, and this is my uncle Eugene's from 1939. I never met Eugene. Eugene, I think, died very quickly after high school graduation from diabetes, but I have both of their high school rings. Okay, and although he had a brief period in college after high school, he very quickly ended up in the war, World War II, and he was in Europe. He was not tell you he was going to go to officer candidate training school, but I think they just pulled them all off and sent them on a big ship over to Europe to be just infantry. So he did become a sergeant. He spent an entire winter in England and had an English girlfriend. He's talked about sleeping in foxholes in the winter in Belgium. And near the end of the war, he was in under Patton's Third Army in opening up the Key to Bastogne in the Battle of the Bulge. He came back from the war and immediately went back to college at Rutgers University, where he had started. He went back into mechanical engineering. This is the mechanical engineering club, and there's I think pretty sure that's him, but it's a big club. Anyway, he was the president of the Mechanical Engineers Club at that point. This was, I think, his senior year. I think this is 1949 yearbook. He met my mother right away when he first came back to school at a mixer in the fall after the war. And this is obviously a picture of the two of them in the center, and another picture of them probably on the Jersey Shore at the same period. And that's his senior picture on the upper left when he graduated. All right, Al, when he got out of Rutgers with his mechanical engineering degree, so did all the rest of the vets, and it was a really tough job market. His first job was in New Jersey in a roofing granule plant, and as a quality control inspector, definitely underemployed, but it was the only thing he could find. And he did rise in that position, eventually becoming a plant manager. And this little picture of the the shovel, this is an homage. A big shovel, brand new shovel that he bought for his plant was a big deal for my dad. And we have lots of pictures of new shovels. This is a house. The first house that my parents bought in the upper left was in New Jersey when he was at that first plant that he had initially gotten hired on. A couple of years later, not a couple, 4 years after we moved into this house, when I was 8, we moved to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. That's this house here in black and white. And you can see that we still have the same Rambler. Although now Dad had a company car that he used for work. We only had a 1-car garage, and this was a really cold place. So the Rambler stayed in the garage, and Dad had a heater to keep the company car from freezing up overnight. Then when I was in middle school, we moved to Missouri, a little close to the Ozarks. That's this house right here. And that was probably his most exciting job. It was a brand new plant it was a greenfield site. So it was going to have a quarry in it, and he was in charge of starting up the whole plant. So my father suddenly went from a guy who wore suits and a briefcase to work to a guy in steel-toed boots and a white hard hat and khakis. And his company car turned into a Jeep, a 4-wheel drive Jeep, which was really, remarkable to me. That's what I saw. So when we lived in Missouri, that's the first place I ever lived where I heard people, not live people, use Southern accents. And finally, when we moved from Missouri back to New Jersey, where we had begun, that's this colonial here, that's the house we lived in. And at that point, Dad was no longer a plant manager. He was the manager of 8 plants around the country. And then he had, I think there were plants in Vermont and Missouri, I know, and New Jersey. I don't really remember where they all were. All of our vacations as children were camping with a trailer and a canoe. There's not very many pictures. There's lots of vacation pictures, but virtually nothing with my father in it, except for this one I found, because always Dad was the one holding the camera. And wherever we lived, New Jersey, Missouri, Michigan, we would take off to see what we could see in that part of the country that wasn't reachable before. So while we lived in Missouri, you can bet that we went west, and we went to Texas, we went to Mesa Verde, we went to Aztec National Park or Monument, we went to the Badlands in the Dakotas. And then when we were living in New Jersey, we would tend to go up to Canada and New York. When we lived in the Upper Peninsula, there's so much beautiful North Woods. I actually don't remember going on a long distance vacation from the UP of Michigan. I just remember being in the North Woods all the time. So once he gets to retirement, mom and dad really discovered a passion for travel. Their very first trip was to take a cruise down the Nile River. So that's what this picture of an Egyptian painting represents. And I think one of the other early trips that they took was a photo safari trip in Kenya, which I believe both of these bottom pictures are from. But they went many, many places. They went to Morocco. They went to the China coast. It was, the China coast was a cruise that actually toured around and stopped at different places along the China coast. And the other thing they took up in retirement after they moved to the Roanoke Valley was boating. They bought a power boat, which they had great fun. They kept it in a dry storage at Hardy Road Marina, and they would pull it down and take their boat all over Smith Mountain Lake. So in 1987, my father died quite suddenly and unexpectedly from a heart attack. So he's been gone a long time, but I will always remember the things that he taught me. He taught me how to ride my first bike. This was not easy. I am not particularly coordinated. It took several weeks, and he came home from work every day, changed, took his tie off, and went out and ran beside me to teach me how to ride that bike because he didn't believe in training wheels. He taught me how to do my taxes when I got my first job in high school. He taught me how to use a drill and a sander. Taught me how to drive a stick shift. But I think the things that he taught me by example are the ones that have really stuck. He was an extraordinarily ethical man, almost to a fault. There was no gray area for him when it came to ethics and honesty. So that's the example I grew up with. And he was a warm, affectionate, and generous man, generous with his money, and warm and generous with his affection as well. So he will always live in my heart. Thank you.